your administration has
How many
released
illegal immigrants?
into the country over
He's
the
asking
last
her.
3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And
you're
I'm
avoiding
gonna
the
talk about
question.
it
But
right
do you,
now,
just a
which
number,
is-
do you
but-
think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system.
You
that
broke
needs to
it.
be
You
repaired.
and Biden.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85%
What was
of
up? You
apprehensions.
took it down.
We have
It's a
an
rough
immigration
estimate of
system
6 million people
that
have been
needs to be-
released into the country. And let me just finish, I'll get to the question, I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And
No, you weren't.
when you came
No,
into
you
office,
weren't.
your administration immediately reversed
You
a
don't
number
answer
of
questions.
Trump border policies. So,
Word salad.
looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
The first bill,
No, she
practically
doesn't
within
regret
hours
it.
of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the
And-
U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021. It was essentially
so,
a pathway to citizenship for the. Yes,
May I
ma'am.
finish? May I finish responding,
But
please?
this-
you have to let me finish.
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate,
I'm
and
in
they
the
didn't
middle
bring
of
up that bill.
responding to the point you're raising,
Okay.
and I'd like to finish.
Okay, answer the question then.
We recognized from day one
Still not
that to the
answering
point
it.
of this being your first question,
Word
it is
salad.
a priority for us as a nation and for the American people.
To keep
And
us
our
safe.
focus has been on fixing a problem.
You're not fixing it. You
This
broke
is the
it.
first time the
You
vice
broke it.
president and the Democrat nominee had ever had to answer for herself. She spent more time defending herself with Brett than she has defending the actual border.
Yep.
Then it got personal.
Yes.
Former President Clinton actually referred to Laken Riley Sunday campaigning for you in Georgia, saying if those men had been properly vetted, Laken Riley probably would not have been killed.
Exactly.
So if
And
it
that
would have
little girl
happened,
wasn't raped and
this
murdered.
is well before
and
any
on
negotiation. This is well before Donald Trump got involved in the politics. This is a specific policy decision by your administration to release these men into the country. So what I'm saying to you, do you owe
Brett,
those
I think it's
families
really- I think-
an apology?
Let me just say, first of all,
She
those are
won't
tragic
apologize.
cases. There's no question about that. There's no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. It is also true
It's
that if a
because
border
of you and
security had
Biden.
actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border, more support.
You
for the
had
folks who
4
are working
years. You
around the
pulled them
clock
off
trying
the
to hold them all
borders.
together.
Brett Baier
Oh
is
my
giving Kamala an opportunity to say if she were president, Laken Riley would have been alive. Kamala should have said that's something I would have done differently than Biden. I would have secured the border much earlier, but I was just the VP serving at the pleasure of the president. And if you vote for me, I promise I'll protect women like Laken Riley.
No,
At
she
this
won't.
stage of the campaign,
She's not for
saying,
middle
I'm
class.
sorry about the dead woman on my watch. It's all Trump's fault. It's not going to fly. Harris has never been pressed this hard on her border policies. And it continued.
Madam Vice President, it was a policy decision in the early part of your administration. I will let one of the mothers talk about it. Take a listen.
Because of the Biden-Harris administration open border policies catch and release, they were enrolled in the Alternatives to Detention program. This meant that they were released into the United States. It was not even a full 3 weeks later that they would take my daughter, Jocelyn Nungare's life. I believe the Biden-Harris administration open border policies are responsible for the death of my daughter.
That's the early
Yes.
days.
Yes,
So do you owe them
you are.
an apology is what
I
I'm
will
saying.
tell you that I'm so sorry for her loss.
Oh, is that
I'm
why
so
you were
sorry
there at
for
the
her loss.
memorial service?
Sincerely.
Yeah, right.
But let's talk about
But
what is happening right now with an individual who does not want to participate in solutions. Let's talk about that as well.
But do you
Right,
want to answer
in
her?
all fairness, I told you, I feel awful for what she and her family have experienced.
During that time, you said repeatedly that the border was secure. When in your mind did it
Lies.
start becoming a crisis?
I think we've had a broken immigration system transcending, by the way, Donald Trump's administration, even before. Let's
that's
be
why
honest
he was
about
putting
that.
up
I have
the
no
wall.
pride in saying that
Not
this
to
is a
keep
perfect
Mexicans
immigration
out
system.
like
I
you
concur. I
guys
think
told
we
us.
all are. That it needs to be fixed.
Kamala just
You
said
had
the
4
border's
years.
always been
4
broken,
years.
but it was secure for 3 years.
Exactly.
When Laken Riley was murdered.
Exactly.
That doesn't make any sense. How did Trump break the border that you said was secure?
Exactly.
You can't follow Kamala's logic because there is
and
none.
Trump spent the
She
FEMA
doesn't know
money
anything
too.
about the border. She doesn't care about the
Lies,
border. She just doesn't want
lies,
anyone talking
lies.
about it. Her whole interview was a continuation of a cover-up. Watch.
Madam Vice President,
But
you
let's
called
not
Donald
diminish
Trump.
the significance
you
of that.
called Donald Trump. He's misguided. You say now
He's
he is
unstable.
unstable.
He is unstable.
How?
He's not well. You
He's
say
running a
mentally not
multi-billion-dollar
stable.
businesses
Let me
all
ask
over
you
the
this.
world.
You
And
told
we
many
should all
interviewers
be
that Joe Biden was on his game, that ran around circles on his staff. When did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
The day he was elected.
Joe
Be
Biden,
truthful, bitch.
I have watched from the Oval Office to the Situation Room, and he has the judgment and the experience to do exactly what he has done in making very important decisions.
Screwing up
on
our
behalf of
country,
the American
huh?
people.
There were no concerns raised?
Brett, Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
I understand.
And
but
Donald Trump.
And
Donald
you
Trump
weren't
is.
either.
And
You
Donald
stole it.
Trump
After George
is.
Clooney said
And
within a
if
few
you
minutes of
watch
talking to President
Donald
Biden at a
Trump-
fundraiser that he thought this was not the same Joe Biden.
Nobody
that we
voted
saw
for
on the
you in
debate
the
stage.
primaries.
Is on the ballot.
I understand. You met with him at least once a week for 3.5 years. You didn't have any concerns?
I
She
think
don't
the
care,
American people
people.
have a concern about Donald Trump.
So Kamala Harris didn't want to talk about Kamala Harris, and she definitely didn't want to talk about Joe Biden. She never once touted the accomplishments of the Biden administration. Not a single one.
There were none. That's
She
why.
just wants to prosecute Donald Trump. But America doesn't want a prosecutor. We want a president.
Free sex change
At
to
one point,
immigrants,
she just
legals.
snapped.
This is a democracy. And in
You
any
don't know what
democracy,
that means.
the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it. And this
You
is what
guys
is
have
at
said
stake,
that
which is
about
why we have
MAGA.
Someone like the former chairman
Oh
of the
my
Joint Chiefs
gosh.
of Staff.
That's all we
saying
hear out of your
what
mouth
Mark
on the
Milley has
news.
said about Donald Trump being a threat to the United
He's
States
only
of
a
America.
threat
Why
to
didn't we see
you
anger like that about
evildoers
the border?
that want to mess
About
everything up.
crisis, about crime. Never kind of showed that flash of anger when it was affecting millions of Americans.
Nope.
She wasn't likable.
She
She wasn't
spews lies
charming.
and
She was never
hatred
funny.
amongst American
She
people.
wasn't warm. There was nothing gracious, eloquent, or reassuring about this performance.
Nope.
Then Brett asked her the question that she's had a week, actually the whole campaign, to think about. Watch this.
So, you're not Joe Biden, you're not Donald Trump, but nothing comes to mind that you would do differently?
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency.
It will be worse.
Like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and
And
new
all of
ideas. I
those
represent
are
a new
evil.
generation of leadership.
Oh my
I,
gosh. Explain
for
yourself.
example, am someone who has not spent the majority of my career in Washington, D.C.
Okay, she
Nor
spent
should
8
you
years in
be.
Washington, D.C. That's twice as long as Trump. And what would you do differently? She said she'd bring fresh new ideas. Then she never said what the ideas were.
Exactly.
Your campaign slogan is a new way forward, and it's time to turn the page. You've been vice president
Yeah, we're gonna
for
turn the
3.5
page with
years.
you
so
on it and shut
what
the
are
book with
turning
you
the
in it.
page from?
Well, first of all, turning the page from the last decade in which we've been burdened with the kind of rhetoric coming from Donald Trump that
No,
has been
coming from
designed
Obama.
and implemented to divide our country.
You have
And have
done that
Americans literally
with your
point
fake
fingers
media.
at each other.
Madam
That
Vice
is
Divided
President,
turning
us.
the
Divide.
page.
70% of people
That is
tell
about turning the
pollsters
page on rhetoric that people are frankly exhausted of, Brett.
if
We
you
are
turn the
exhausted
page,
of you.
You've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
But you've been the
He's
person
not
who
in
ran
there.
office.
Come on.
Okay?
You and I both know what I'm talking about. You and
He
I
was
both
in
know
there.
what
Did
I'm
he
talking
do
about.
half the
What are you
damage
talking
you
about?
guys
What I'm
did?
talking
Not a
about is
bit.
that over the last decade,
You're
people
the
have
lever of
become.
power.
But listen, over the last decade,
don't even
it
know
is
what
clear to
she's
me,
saying.
and certainly the Republicans who are on stage with me, the former chief of staff to the president, Donald Trump, former defense secretaries, national security advisor, and his vice president. One, that he is unfit to serve, that he is unstable, that he is dangerous.
So turning the
my
page
gosh.
isn't turning the page from Biden.
He's only
She's gonna
dangerous
do
to the
everything he's
global
saying.
elites because he
She's
won't
just
bow down to them.
Turning the page from Trump, who wasn't in office.
You're just a
Her
puppet to
slogans
them.
don't even make sense because 79% of the country wants to turn the page from her.
Amen.
This is what an actual Kamala Harris interview should look like. Brett gave her the same treatment as he gave Trump in the spring. Respectful, firm, and persistent. We didn't swap her answers to make her look better like CBS. We didn't invite little Timmy along to hold her hand like CNN.
Yep.
This was a big girl interview. And she flopped.
She sure did.
Executive VP of the Trump Organization, Donald Trump Jr., joins me now. So, this was her first real aggressive questioning. How do you think she fared?
I think that was a major failure. And the reality is, Jesse, you don't go on Brett Baier if you're winning. This is an act of desperation from a desperate person. She's not going to do anything differently. She cut and pasted Joe Biden's policies
except
and didn't
raise
change the
taxes
source code
higher
when a month after
on middle
her
class
coup,
and the poor.
She likes to talk about democracy,
So
but
we're all
didn't
poor.
win a single vote in her primary to become the Democratic nominee. It's absolutely amazing. The people that she talks about intelligence that say Trump is unstable, those are the same people that signed off on the Hunter Biden laptop being Russian disinformation.
Yep.
We know that's all a lie. It's an abject disaster for her. She became unhinged. They're pulling her early because she got angry and couldn't answer even basic questions. She didn't just fail with Brett Baier, she failed on The View, Jesse, last week. Imagine how bad you have to be as a Democrat to go on The View and basically commit political suicide. She doesn't have it. Americans understand that. She'll tell you whatever you need to hear to get
Yep.
that vote.
It's all
But
she
she's the
wants.
daughter of a Marxist professor.
And
She's a
look it up,
radical
people.
San
She
Francisco
never
liberal.
denied
She
it.
has been in charge for 3.5 years because she's not just a vice president. She's a vice president to the most absentee president in the history of the United States. Someone who has spent over 40% of his time on the beach in Delaware.
Yep.
And, not to mention the dementia. She could have done any one of these things over the last 3.5 years, yet she did none of them. Why wait? Is she going to wait till day one on January 20th? Americans are suffering. Inflation is killing us. Wars are breaking out all over the world. Iran is endorsing her. Vladimir Putin is endorsing her because
Okay,
they
that's
understand
gotta tell
that
you
a
people.
weak America
Wake
is good
up,
for Iran.
wake up.
A weak America is good for China. A weak America is good for Russia. She's not going to change anything. It's going to be an abject disaster, Jesse.
Yeah.
But why can't she just say, I'm going to change? Why can't she just go out there and say, Joe was a mess. I had lunch with him. He fell asleep in his soup. I didn't want to do what he did with the border. He wanted to blow it up. I was just being a loyal foot soldier. I didn't really like what happened in the Middle East. He spent too much money. I was just there because he tapped me as VP. Why can't she just do that? It's the only thing that will allow her to survive this election. But she's clinging to this failed president like a psychopath.
Because she has no choice. Because she's on the record for the last almost 4 years saying that she was the last person in the room. She approved this, she approved that. Joe Biden said the same thing in the interviews over the last 2 weeks. They worked hand in hand.
Yeah.
She was part of every decision. The problem is every
that's what he
decision
said
has
too.
made America weaker. Every decision has made America poor. Jesse, we went from a
Our
time
dollar is
of
weaker.
prosperity to a time of poverty.
Coming
We went
after
from a
your money,
time of
people,
peace
and your
to a
homes
time
and your
of
cars.
war. Ask yourself, if this is the old, the age-old question, when were you better off? When do you think your kids had a better chance? And apparently, at least 79% of Americans agree. I don't know what's going on with the other 21%, because if I take my kids to McDonald's and Donald Trump Jr. has sticker shock at McDonald's because it's too expensive, that's a problem.
Yeah.
If I'm upset when I go to McDonald's or the grocery store, what's a hardworking, blue-collar American family making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year? How do they feel? They're getting crushed. And Kamala Harris is incompetent. You saw the answers. If she can't do 20 minutes of a fair interview, someone finally asked her a couple, at least real questions for a change, that hiding her in the basement strategy was the right way to go. But that too is failing because she agreed with all of the policies that got us to this disastrous place. So they had to put her out there, and it's not working. If she can't do 20 minutes with Brett Baier, how's she going to do against Vladimir Putin? How's she going to do against the Muslims
That's
in Iran?
why they want
How's
her
she gonna
in
do
the
against Xi
office.
or North Korea or any of the other enemies
can take
of
over
America,
our country
any of
because
the
she's
other
so
enemies of freedom around the world, she's going to get steamrolled.
Yep.
This is not a competent person that can handle this.
No.
She got unhinged in a very basic interview. Our enemies would love a Kamala Harris presidency. They are rooting for it
Yep.
like you've never seen.
Yep.
There's a reason Iran is trying to kill my father. And it's not because they want him to be president. It's because they understand that Kamala Harris's weakness is a huge benefit
Yep.
to all of our adversaries all over the world.
Yep.
And they would love to have 4 more years of this unmitigated disaster.
Yeah, you mentioned McDonald's too, Don. I know your dad's going to be there someday working the fry machine. Did your dad watch the Fox interview with Kamala? What do you think?
Listen, I think my father knows the McDonald's menu much better than Kamala Harris ever did, and yet she can't tell us which. I wish Brett would have asked which McDonald's.
And not only do we ask ourselves if we were better off, they're saying he's a Nazi, blah. I said it myself when he was in office because I believed the lies that our media told us. I believed every single one of them until I started doing my own investigation. And do not use Google because Google is bought and paid for by these people as the news is. All right? Ask yourself, if he was a Nazi and he's going to destroy democracy, did he do that when he was in office 4 years ago? No, he did not. They don't want him there because he's a threat to them and their secret society of the 1% globalists that want to control us all and make us eat fake meat, drive electric vehicles, take our home, control our bank. Is that not a tyrant? Is that not a dictatorship? Wake the hell up, people. Wake up.